Welcome to Pond Lehocky, the largest workers' compensation law firm in Pennsylvania. With over 250 years of combined courtroom experience, we've helped over 100,000 injured and disabled workers obtain benefits, as well as some of the biggest settlements in the state. Even better, Pond Lehocky doesn't charge a dime until you win. If you've been injured at work, give Pond Lehocky a call.
And welcome in everyone to another edition of the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krause. Great to be back here the second week of December. Big topic of discussion today, JDoc, for our listening audience. This is a topic that is now front page news.
No question about it, Joe. I mean, you and I have been talking about electric vehicle mandates for months and months. Lots going on there. Obviously, those are statewide mandates taken from the California rule. A lot of things, we're on the East Coast. Of course, this is going across the country, but I believe there's 17 states that opt in automatically to the California environmental rule. And so having said that, New Jersey, and Delaware here on the East Coast, but that's not exactly what we're talking about today. We're talking about the CARS Act. The EPA has a new standard they're putting in place. It's separate from the EV mandates. This is our governmental agency changing the standards, for our gas-fueled cars and emissions that come from our tailpipes and all those things. But they're going to make it almost impossible. They're going to almost completely eliminate, gas-fueled cars. And, we're going to be talking on the program, of course, with Brendan Williams, who's the head of government relations, PBF Energy, and Aaron Ringel, who is the vice president of government relations for the AFPM, the American Fuel Petrochemical Manufacturers. And we're going to go through the CARS Act, which, by the way, we support, because what it does is it stops, some really unreasonable parts of the new standard, the new EPA standard, and it also,
But JDoc, the reality of it is, and you guys will get into it on the other side of the break, but the other reality is, as I sit and listen to that, like I always do as a listener, the reality of it is, it's a different name, but it's the same outcome.
Well,
you eliminate that, and all of our refineries now are all of a sudden on potential chopping blocks. Once the refineries end up on the chopping block, the revenue goes away, the jobs go away, and everything else that builds the communities that are supported by by those that work at the refineries. And it's a different reaction. It's a negative reaction. At least that's how I see it on the surface. Couple seconds left before we get to the break, and I know you're going to jump right into it.
And so with the new EPA standard, it's got to be in full effect by 2032. The mandates are 2035. The mandates are in 17 states. The EPA standard is national. So the impact is, unprecedented. By the way, Congress is voting on it today. And so obviously, we have a lot to talk about with our guests.
Good stuff today here on the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krause. We'll get to a break. JDoc will pick it up on the other side. Back in a moment.
Welcome to Pond Lehocky, the largest workers' compensation law firm in Pennsylvania. With over 250 years of combined courtroom experience, we've helped over 100,000 injured and disabled workers obtain benefits, as well as some of the biggest settlements in the state. Even better, Pond Lehocky doesn't charge a dime until you win. If you've been injured at work, give Pond Lehocky a call.
The best way to describe Anthony, David, and Jane are that they're my brothers. I met Anthony at LA Fitness because I noticed that he had a Teamster's bag and his dad was a Teamster leader.
I'm a third-generation son of labor. My grandmother worked in a factory. My mother and father were both Teamster members. I don't think there's a trade that I don't have a family member in.
What's so big for me coming from a union background is what affects one member affects the entire membership.
A lot of people can relate to the issues that individuals deal with. We pride ourselves on empathy.
The big value that's always instilled in you if you grow up in a union household is the importance of brotherhood. People that lean on each other, that rely on each other.
When we were building this business, having that background and knowing what matters most to the union members is really what we use to drive and build out Retiree First.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News.
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey on the Jacob Media Network. Like I said in the opening, we've been talking about EV mandates, gas car bans, for a while now, and there's some really good reasons for that, and we're going to discuss them. One of the things that I like to do is, and it's incredibly important, like we said in the first segment, is educate people why electric vehicle mandates are such a bad thing in regards to taking choice away from our consumers. Okay, we don't have like I said, we don't have the projected infrastructure to support the mandates. Okay, we're for electric vehicles. Okay, there's some issues that we can take, that certainly, we can deal with. But when you talk about a mandate, okay, you're now opening up a whole can of worms. One of the issues is people don't understand what they are. Okay, today's broadcast is not exactly about the mandates. Okay, it's about a situation, okay, where our EPA is creating a standard, a federal EPA greenhouse gas standard, okay, that is in effect a de facto mandate. And so I'm ecstatic to bring into the program Brendan Williams, who's the head of government relations at PBF Energy. How are you, Brendan?
Great. Good to be here.
Great to have you. And Aaron Ringel, who's the vice president of government relations for the AFPM. Aaron, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today and talk about these critical issues for your listeners.
Absolutely. And when we talk, people are going to hear a lot about what's called the Krause Act, okay, and a conversation that, I'm sure HR 4468, which actually gets voted on today in Congress, okay? And so, it's going to impact jobs. It's going to impact so many different areas. And I would bet everything I own that the people in our general public never heard of it, has no idea the impact it's going to have on it. So I'm going to, Brendan, you and I, we've been talking about this a long time. Aaron, if you would, okay, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the AFPM, if you would, for our listeners.
No, absolutely. And again, thanks for having us to talk on the show today about these critical issues. I mean, the labor leaders out in force contacting their members of Congress, let them know about how these policies hurt their members and put their family wage jobs at risk. And that's super important. But, Aaron Ringel, head of government relations here at AFPM, the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. We make the products that make America move. We make, our members make fuel, they make petrochemical products, they make the plastics, they make everything that goes into modern society. You can't have a modern economy, modern society without our members and the products that they put forward and the employees that are out there every day making sure that Americans can get to work. This issue is hugely important. This goes beyond anything previous administrations have ever done. This tailpipe rule is a de facto EV mandate, an internal combustion engine ban. It applies to all cars and light duty trucks, which are the backbone of the American workforce. It's how we get to work. It's how we get home. It's how we do work. The administration, the Biden administration, is requiring through these emission standards that almost 70% of new vehicles be battery electric. So the electric cars, electric trucks by 2032. This is 10 times the current EV sales rate. That's a tenfold increase, which is roughly 7% right now. That's crazy in less than 10 years. Now, this isn't a suggestion or a guideline. However, they want to, wordsmith that this is a mandate, and no other technology is considered here to meet that standard. Just EVs. You can't have a plug-in hybrid. You can't have a flex fuel vehicle. Nothing else. Only EVs. And American consumers, as we can clearly see, don't want to be told what to drive and what works for their families.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that we've been talking about this, and Brendan, you and I have really talked to her blue in the face. People, and I want to, and why labor is so, incensed about the situation is in layman's terms. Okay, you wonder if there's obviously supposed to be some smart people at the EPA. Okay, and of course, in government, but you'd wonder why. And I like to connect the dots. So let's take a look at this. And so you ban gas fueled, cars. Okay, and they're doing it in a lot of states. And Brendan, you and I are going to talk about that. But let's think about it for a second. This legislation that's supposed to be 100% by 2035. Okay, and now you got the EPA standard, which will hit. Start the process on steroids. Okay, you shut the sales down of gas fueled automobiles. Okay, you're now shutting down the refineries and all the jobs that go with it, because we don't need the refineries if we don't need the fuel. The majority of the refineries. Automobile. Anybody who's doing sales in automobiles, that's shut down. And the gas stations, we don't need them, okay? And we don't have the infrastructure for what this is going to set up. We see the 2 or 3, where you get the ports for the electric cars. We see them on occasion. We're in a sense shutting ourselves down, and now we got our own government agency, lighting this thing up on steroids. Brendan, jump on there, would you?
Yeah, no, it's true. Look, I think certainly there's a demand for electric vehicles, but they're still essentially luxury cars. Even though you've seen some folks engage in price cutting, mostly to protect market share, right? Tesla tried to bring their prices down, but you see some of the numbers and they're staggering. Ford saying they're losing 70,000 a vehicle on electric cars. So this has ramifications. It's not sustainable for the auto industry, I would argue. But as you touched on, look at the signal you're sending to all the other industries in America that to date have been the lifeblood, essentially, of this country. Refineries don't just make gasoline and diesel. We make the petrochemicals. Actually, half of an electric car is petrochemicals, right? Asphalt. So our Paulsboro, New Jersey refinery is actually, I think, the last remaining asphalt producer on the East Coast. Certainly the largest one. We passed a bipartisan infrastructure law. It's going to help create a lot of jobs, but you want roads, you're going to need asphalt. And so you're shutting, and these big machines, these big chemistry sets, they every handful of years we have to do what's called a turnaround. So it's basically a major revamp of the refinery. You revamp all the equipment, make sure it's all operating well, clean everything out, and we'll bring another 1,000 to 2,000 building trades workers in every time we do a turnaround. But those things have to be planned 5 to 10 years in advance. And as you're going through these cycles, if the federal government on top of these states start instituting these mandates, it's only a matter of time before investors are like, all right, if they don't want you, yeah, maybe this experiment doesn't work, but why should we even wait around, right? Should we employ our capital elsewhere? When all is said and done, by the time people wake up, if these policies move forward, by the time future Congresses, future administrations wake up and realize they're not possible, the damage could already be done. And that's a situation we need to avoid.
And so let me ask Aaron to clarify what the difference is, okay, between a federal law that gives California the power to set auto standards and then let other states opt in, and the federal EPA GHG standard.
Well, I think that first off, the California waiver, I think that when the Clean Air Act was instituted, I don't think Reagan had any inkling that this is what would happen, that states would take this waiver that was granted to California to allow them to address some of their transportation issues in the high density areas and turn it into a de facto nationwide EV mandate from California.
Right.
Separate issue, obviously. This is the California waiver, applies to 17 states that have elected to opt into California's plan here. EPA's proposal on tailpipe is nationwide. California allows for battery electric vehicles, fuel cell, and no more than 20% roughly plug-in hybrid, while the EP tailpipe is essentially 100% EV. California's target, 35% by 2025, 100% by 2035. EPA is roughly 70 by 2032, and that is all EV. That's going to drive an insane amount of consumers out of the market, millions of jobs in the refining, petrochemical, extractive industries gone. And as Brendan aptly noted, when you're looking at long-term investments and you see this on the horizon as a potential stick coming at you, are you going to invest in a turnaround? Are you going to invest in new upgrades? Or are you just going to say, we're just not going to produce if you're not going to be there for us, if we're not going to have the markets, even though we know that this is going to fail? And guess what? When you shut a refinery down, it doesn't come back. And I remember administration starts facing higher gas prices. They call in our members, say, what can you guys do to lower gas prices in the next 2 months, and then stop? And there's like, sorry, we can't turn any of these refineries. Like, they ask, can you turn these refineries back on? And we're like, wow, really don't understand our industry. You don't understand when these refineries go offline, they're not coming back. It's just not there. The expense, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen that firsthand, JDoc, right? With, PES, only a couple of the units of the 30 were destroyed in the fire. You couldn't get people to finance it because a lot of these overly aggressive programs and, EV mandates are the icing on the cake, and in addition to RINs and everything else. Building what Aaron said too, when the Clean Air Act was written, they said, okay, California, you got a smog issue. So, you can do things to address a smog issue. And if other states you want to do that, you can do California, or you could just follow the federal air quality guidelines, right? It was not intended to say, well, let's just ban, the car that Americans drive every day, right? And I think, as Aaron mentioned, the key difference is with the California waiver, states don't have to opt in. States can opt in, but they don't. And the 17 states you mentioned represent about 30% of the market. But with the federal standard, it's requiring that 6 to 7% of all, so almost 70% of all new vehicles can only be electric come 2032, as you noted, less than a decade. So you have the state standard, which applies to 17 states, which is a harmful signal enough. But now you're laying on top of it this federal standard where, states don't even have the ability to say, no, I don't want to do that. It applies to, the whole auto industry at large and every car that's sold in the country.
It's a 1-2 punch, and it's not good.
So having said that, when we look at this and the domino effect, we've had New Jersey Car on the program that we represent all the auto dealers in New Jersey, and they're worried. Obviously, they're Delaware, and New Jersey are opted into this California rule, and so obviously, of course, they're worried that people will just go and other states and buy automobiles. It'll put them all out of business. But then I thought about it. I'm going to take a shot at this, and eventually, there won't be gas stations for people to fuel their car. I mean, it's a cluster of epic proportions.
On that, JDoc, California actually decided to go one further after proposing to ban cars, and they've banned construction of new gas stations. So, your hypothetical thought process is sadly became a nightmare in reality in some states.
No question.
Because they haven't spent any of the billions in this EV charging infrastructure act that was passed in the IRA to put in place these chargers that they're screaming from the rooftops about, because they're not there.
Exactly, and we have issues with the grid. No, I mean we talk about the twilight zone often, and this is a great. By the way, what's the purpose? Like, what is the purpose of this EPA regulations, new standard? Is it to, in a sense, reinforce the EV mandates, make them national, and just another way of a think tank to make sure that this thing goes down?
I mean, the purpose is to outlaw the internal combustion engine. That, I mean, if you just take all of the spin out of it, these standards are here for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to get gas out of cars and put people in expensive EVs. It takes our energy independence and shifts it from America and puts it on China.
Wow, that's I mean, what auto industry we do have here that hasn't been obvious that Japan and other manufacturing countries have impacted the United States is now going to be at the end. I mean, literally, we're giving what we got left away. I mean, literally, there's that's why you said there's so many angles to it. So right now, the EPA standard obviously isn't realized. Okay, it hasn't been finalized. Today, there's a big vote in Congress. Okay, when do we expect this to be final? And can folks still express concern over it to the administration?
No, absolutely. And we anticipate it by March of 2024. That's their planned timeline for finalizing this. They're moving quick. They either get it done now as because it's a political loser for them, and hope that voters forget by November that they're not going to have the choice in which vehicle they can purchase anymore.
Right.
Or they stall it out and do it as a midnight rulemaking should the president lose. Either way, it's bad. We anticipate by March 2024. And your listeners, I absolutely would encourage them to call your congressman, your senator, reach out to the administration and tell them the consumer choice should drive the market, not fiat by the government telling them what they can and can't drive and what works best for their family. And most importantly, to vote, to go out and demand your representatives tell you where they stand on taking away consumers' right to choose the car and trucks they drive and their families depend upon. Let them know that you're voting on this. This is an issue for you. You don't want to be told by the government what you can and cannot purchase.
What's even more amazing about that, especially when they have a large, and we're going to talk about a poll that the AFPM took on this issue, but we've talked about it many times, and so many people have no idea. They're not only getting the choice taken away for the automobile that they drive, they're getting this choice, the choice to have an opinion on it, because so many people don't understand it. I know the auto manufacturers are always worried about the government and what they'll do to them next, but how come they aren't standing up against this and screaming from the top of the highest mountain? I mean, were they even consulted in these standards?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. They reached out to the autos about these standards, and when they were first sitting at the table, they assumed, yeah, let's talk about it at a 50% adoption by 2032, and then they smirked and they're like, that's not going to be possible. We're going to have to negotiate down to something achievable, wink, wink. And then the White House announced the mandate would be 67%, and the manufacturers appeared shocked. They were like, this is not what we saw coming. And so much so they skipped the White House Rose Garden announcement, which was canceled and turned into a press conference by EPA Administrator Regan, who just stood in front of the EPA and announced it. But honestly, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and they can either oppose this rule publicly and likely face significant political and regulatory blowback on all of their pending issues they have, or they can work the system and hope to get a slightly better outcome. Either way, the recent scaling back of manufacturer investment in EVs is a pretty loud market signal that they don't think this plan is feasible. Like even the head of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, the main trade association for these manufacturers, said these regulations are so restrictive, they're a de facto EV mandate. They can't be met by industry without increasing the cost of vehicles, and then in turn reducing consumer choice, which disadvantages the entire American workforce.
Brandon, we got about a minute to the break. You want to follow up on that?
Yeah, no, I think Aaron hit the nail on the head, right? The autos are always worried. Every time they've stuck their head out and highlighted things publicly, they'll get attacked from the really far left and, certain elements of, various government agencies that, kind of have their own agenda sometimes, irrespective of who's sitting at the White House. And they're a really heavy regulated industry. They have to make decisions on really long time horizons. So I think you saw that a handful of years ago when California was first starting to talk about banning cars. You had a handful of autos stand up and say, no, we're going to challenge this. And they faced the wrath of California regulators when they did so. So unfortunately, we think we'd love them to stand up and be louder. But unfortunately, they're not. It's just one of the reasons why we're talking about it. And as JDoc, auto dealers, parts manufacturers, right? Even just to look at our sector, outside of our sector, there's a lot of union jobs at stake, right? So not only are refineries heavily unionized, but the auto parts manufacturers, those guys are all pretty well organized, and in states like Pennsylvania, like Ohio, those are the ones that face significant job losses as well. Because the parts guys will face the same thing. Their guys are going to be like, all right, well, if people are going to say the cars that use our parts are going to be banned, why should we kind of keep investing in them, right? And as you always say, JDoc, it's my JDoc bingo card. You want to talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? That's
yeah. Krause always he teases me about that, but it's so true. And there's never been a more true situation. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break. We're going to have more from the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey in our discussion with Brendan Williams and Aaron Ringel on what the Cars Act in just a minute.
My name is Eleanor Northaft. My husband was in the union, Local 282. As I'm getting older, I'd like somebody to fight for me. So I called up Retiree First.
Hi.
And I got Brooke.
So nice to meet you. I'm Brooke. I'm an advocate at Retiree First. I've been working with Eleanor for 3 years. She was one of my first calls. I helped her with transportation to her doctors, getting her glasses reimbursed.
Oh, they are pretty fancy.
I'm basically just answering any questions she has.
And I always have a lot of questions.
Not too many.
I have a friend there. I love it because I can depend on her to help me out in any situation.
Oh, I'm excited.
She always comes through for me.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live.
And the big story on Action News.
Plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on, always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
Welcome back to the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. We're in the middle of a conversation with Brendan Williams, Head of Government Relations, PBF Energy, and Aaron Ringel, Vice President, Government Relations, AFPM. Okay, and we're talking about the Cars Act. We're talking about EV mandates. It seems like, they're doing everything they can to surround this situation to ensure that not only don't people have the choice to choose what automobile they want to drive, but that they get what they want. And in spite of the overwhelming, it's not even evidence, it's a fact, that we do not have the infrastructure to handle this. By the way, one of the things that really gets me is some of the most qualified people, when we talk about our environmental standards, are those that work in the traditional energy sector. And so we're not only taking choice away from the people, but we're taking some of the most passionate and educated people and most resourceful industries and taking them out of the equation. And eventually these people, if they're really unlucky, they'll get what they want. Okay. And certainly we're here to make sure that the general public, okay, Advocacy United, our nonprofit, our board of directors, and by the way, we have individuals who are on our energy education and awareness board right here, Brendan Williams, and of course Jet Thompson of the AFPM. And so, gentlemen, let's continue this conversation. We're talking about the CARS Act, okay, which is getting voted on in Congress potentially today, okay. And so, by the way, we're recording the show on Wednesday, the 6th of December. So by the time it airs, we'll have an answer. So we're going to give everybody, information on when you can call and all that stuff. Having said that, okay, two congressional congressional black caucuses, obviously the Black Caucus and two congressional Hispanic caucus members sent the administration a letter expressing concern that the EPA standard could make driving a luxury. Okay. And let me just repeat that. Two congressional Black Caucus members and two congressional Hispanic caucus members, talked about concern, okay, sent a letter that could make driving a luxury now, particularly because of the cost of electric vehicles in comparison and the lack of choice. Aaron, if you will, walk our listeners through this letter.
No, absolutely. And I want to note, these are 4 Democrat members of Congress representing predominantly minority communities. This letter really calls into focus the impact that this is going to have on the left behind population in America that doesn't live on the East or West Coast and can afford an EV or has access to EVs or charging infrastructure or the ability to even buy an EV. These are folks that are living at or below the federal poverty line, and they're being left behind in this rulemaking. These members are pointing this out, that less than 17% of low-income Americans purchase a new car, let alone an EV. And the market for used EVs is just not there. Even used EVs are way more expensive than a new traditional internal combustion engine vehicle, or that's not even taking into account a used one. And even if they're used, they're not affordable or available with the least economic means. And if folks can't buy a new car, most are going to defer and continue driving their old models. These are cars that they rely on that are instrumental for their families, for getting to work, for making money to support their families. They're being left behind. There's no way that if you were to go one of these communities and say, are you interested in a Tesla? They'd be, even if they were, they wouldn't spend the money on a Tesla because it can go towards their families, let alone the infrastructure, the additional costs, even the availability. This doesn't take into account these individuals. And they say in this letter, this regulation doesn't take into account other methods that could be approached here, whether it's hybrid vehicles, battery electric hybrid, any of these options that would be positive for these communities aren't taken into consideration. So they're being left behind. And there's a safety issue here. Generally, older vehicles have been found on the road to be less safe. And if you're not going to be able to get into a new internal combustion engine vehicle, or even a used one, or an EV, you're going to keep driving your car. And that's going to keep lower fuel efficiency, higher miles on the road. And this regulation is leaving behind these families and imposing the cost on them for the individuals who can afford, the relatively affluent individuals who can't afford an EV right now. And they're going to
the batteries alone. Okay, the prices are just astronomical. Okay, it's not just the car. I mean, literally speaking, not and who knows what the used car EV used car standards are. Are there more members? I mean, why aren't there more members of Congress concerned about this? I mean, talk about that, because
they're the members, and this is the issue, and it becomes partisan slightly. We hear a lot of comments, concern, letters behind the scene from Democrat members of Congress, but you're asking them to stand up against a sitting president, shoving a mandate down on their consumers and their constituents, and it's not a profiling courage. We're not asking people to charge a trend share. We're asking them to stand up for the people in their communities, the workers that are making these vehicles, the labor and tradesmen who are out there every day working to get gas into cars by making sure these plants operate. We're asking them to stand up for them against this administration, and that's a challenge for them, and we get that. But they're expressing to us that they see that this is unworkable. They may support the tenets of reducing emissions. Who doesn't? We are working, our members are working overtime to reduce the current emission standards, and we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg. We keep making advancements every day, and so do the auto manufacturers. But 230 members of Congress, both Senate and House, sent a letter recently advocating for the repeal of this ban. We have Democrat members that stand up on the California waiver vote. Not too long ago, we had 8 Democrats cross the aisle, stand up and say, no, this doesn't work for my constituents, doesn't work for those living at or below poverty line, rural Americans, those without the means to buy an EV. They stood up, and we're hoping for more today.
Well, it's interesting because labor, obviously we have a large portion of our workforce that works at the plants, at the refineries, obviously manufacturing plants. Okay, so it's one of the things that we say. First of all, I've said this 1 million times on this program. Okay? We typically, it's a support Democrat, and Biden has been real good to unions, no question about it. However, this is not a union issue. It shouldn't be a political issue. It's a human issue, okay? And you'll hear from a lot of our labor people that labor supports those who support us, and a lot of that's issue-based, okay? And this particular situation, it poses an issue in labor, and we have so many labor union leaders that are in support of the CARS Act because they know the tidal wave and the lack of thinking through the whole entire situation that this EV mandate and this EPA standard is setting us up for. So it's confusing when you think about it. So luckily we have obviously one branch of Congress standing up against this. I want to get to the bill the House of Representatives is considering in a second. But first, I understand the AFPM just released the results of a poll of what consumers think about banning the traditional gas cars and mandating EVs. Aaron, can you walk me through that? What the poll asked and what the results were.
Well, we conducted a national poll, independent survey, no partisanship here. And we found that 60% of Americans, and these are general election voters, the people are showing up, oppose EPA's ban on new gas cars. And as you might expect, Republicans really don't want it, nearly 90%, but a key 61% of independents feel the same exact way. This is a mover for independents. Nobody wants to be told what they can or cannot buy, and they don't want choice taken away from them in their marketplace for what's best for the family. Roughly half of all voters said they are less likely to vote for a candidate who supports banning the sale of gas-fueled cars by 2035. 50% is a moving number. When you get 50% in a poll saying that people are going to vote based on that, you pay attention. And that just goes to show that this is a very unpopular regulation and ban that they're putting on American consumers and voters.
Yeah, building on what Aaron said, JDoc, as we've talked about before, we've seen similar numbers in New Jersey and Delaware. And it goes back to something you highlight a lot, JDoc, is that, so many people just don't know about this, even elected officials. And in New Jersey, when we started highlighting the implications of this issue, when you had all kinds of groups in New Jersey, refiners, auto dealers, retailers, restaurants, right? People from across the spectrum stand up. You did get a bipartisan outcry. Unfortunately, Murphy, on his own pushed through the standard, but there are a lot of Democrats that got elected that said, hey, I oppose this, and this is something we're going to have to look at in the legislature. And a lot about it is educating. But a lot of it is also, getting on the record and highlighting there's bipartisan support for policies, for more common sense policies. And that's what the CARS Act is really about, which Aaron could give you a pretty good summary of.
Well, but before I would say this. You said, and what we always say in our Energy Education and Awareness Initiative, hey, I'm a Democrat. I'm a Labor Democrat, supported Democrats my whole life. But it's about common sense in energy here, okay? We talk about choice, Aaron, and people want the choice. I think that's obviously important. But the education, being educated allows people to make a choice. Okay, not just in buying their cars, but in making the actual decision here. And that's such a big part of this. Okay, it's a big issue, number one, but to me, it's not the most important issue. The fact that it's not humanly possible. We're having grid issues right now. Okay, you're talking about an astronomical, devastating situation if we were to shut down. Especially in areas of jobs, okay, of industry, of energy, how many things these things are there's so many issues of giving away our entire industry to China. Okay, by the way, we haven't, and we've talked about it. That's why people should understand this. This isn't about cars. Okay, this is about so many things in our way of life. Okay, we've talked about the slave labor in the Congo, in regards to the critical minerals for the batteries, for the EV batteries. You could go on forever here. Okay, and so it's so important in so many different ways. Okay, let's talk about why we're not, we talked a little bit about why Democrats have been, obviously you got a sitting president, okay, and so it's a very difficult situation for some people, but they got to stand up and be heard on this issue. We polled also in Pennsylvania. Am I right, Aaron? Could you give us a little bit of what the results were?
We asked very similar questions in Pennsylvania to the national, and it tracks with the national numbers. Nearly 60% of Pennsylvanians oppose EPA's ban. That's huge. And they're a lot less likely to vote for candidates who want to ban the sale of new cars. They're doing in the state of California. And 58% of Pennsylvanians say they're less likely to vote for any candidate who's on the side of vehicle bans. This national trend goes local. This is not just one area. We find this across a lot of different subsets, and it's a mover. And I think to your point very clearly, it's about educating them. And during the previous, attempts to impose further bans, people saw a lot more about it. The administrations prior to this highlighted them a lot more. They talked about their clean power plants, and it brought a lot of attention to it. They're trying to do the same exact thing, but they're trying to sneak it through without consumers knowing what's actually going to happen. And it's awful for the American consumer.
So having said that, okay, obviously, we talk about, the CARS Act, HR 4468. House of Representatives is moving on it now. Okay. Talk to our listeners about this bill. Elaborate on it. Okay. Absolutely. One more time. What does it do? Why is it important? What is it?
Okay. So in short, the CARS Act is going to keep American consumers and their families in the driver's seat on what vehicle works best for them. It's not going to tell EPA that they can't set tailpipe standards. Let's just disprove that all at once. Nobody's trying to say, just burn it and emit it and be out there. What we're saying is they can't choose one technology over the other. You have to have a broad mix, and you can't say EVs have to be a de facto mandate for everybody to drive. It's going to stop EPA from finalizing its proposal. That's going to force 70% of new car and truck sales to be electric in 10 years. And it's not going to interfere with their ability to set ambitious vehicle emission standards. It's going to clarify that EPA standards must be technology neutral, meaning the agency can't use standards to ban or limit access to any vehicle powertrain technologies. But what it will do was protect consumer choice. And that's the most important thing here, is that allowing consumers to decide what's best for their families while still leaving the door open for EVs. We're not against EVs. We're pro consumers choosing what they want to drive.
Yeah, building on what Aaron said, I mean, he really highlighted a key point. EPA can still set tailpipe standards. They can still even set aggressive tailpipe standards. And there's a lot of opportunities to reduce emissions that don't necessarily entail EVs. You know, people talk about energy transition. Well, look at what refiners are doing in the renewable diesel space, right? You know, there's a lot of problems with the renewable fuel standard, but there's, you know, elements of it that are workable. And one of the things that refiners have done in response to it is invest in renewable diesel. You're using soy oil, fats, oils, greases, restaurant grease to basically make a product that's chemically indistinguishable from petroleum diesel and can go into trucks. And it's a heck of a lot cheaper because you get to use your existing vehicle. Those things can greatly advance emissions. Toyota actually sent an infographic out to a lot of their dealers in response to some of these standards, highlighting you could actually get more emissions reductions faster by just having more hybrids sooner on the road than in mandating electric vehicles. Because when you mandate electric vehicles, you get what the letter we mentioned earlier entailed, right? It's, you know, people hold onto their cars longer, you have higher emissions. And so that's an important part about the bill. The bill does not prevent EPA from setting standards. And as what we just went through highlighted, there's a lot of ways you can reduce emissions without mandating EVs. But it does say, you know, EPA can't, you know, basically misconstrue their authorities to create setting emission standards and turn it into a de facto vehicle ban, which is what the EPA rule does.
So, gentlemen, you know, we're coming to the end of the broadcast, and I want to just touch on something to our listeners. Okay, by the time this show airs, hopefully the CARS Act will have passed. Okay, in the House. All right, to our listeners. Okay, you should see how your member of Congress voted. Thank them if they supported it, while expressing concern and disappointment if they voted against it and taking your choice away. Okay. My understanding that there's also a Senate legislation that Senator Manchin has co-sponsored. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator Crapo and Senator Manchin, the two leads on this bill, bipartisan Senate companion to the CARS Act. S3094 is the Senate bill number, and and to speak to your listeners, you should absolutely reach out to your senators and encourage them to co-sponsor. This is critical for our workers. To get behind this effort. And if listeners right now want to stay up to date on this issue or others impacting the industry, they can sign up for our updates at Empower at empower.afpm.org. We have all of the info, talking points, and the resources available to reach out to your members so that we can get this message out there that this is unworkable for American families and to keep consumer choice for automobiles.
Aaron Ringel, Vice President, Government Relations, the AFPM, and Brendan Williams, Head of Government Relations, PBF Energy. I want to thank you both for being on the broadcast and helping to educate our listeners on what the realities and the truths are in this situation, because it's so important for people to be educated and be a part of the decision process, as well as to have the choice to purchase the vehicle of your choice. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being on the broadcast.
Thanks, JDoc.
You got it.
Hey, JDoc, you got to tell Krausey we have to have a JDoc bingo special show because my phrases are starting to mount up. I got throwing the baby out with the bathwater, shooting yourself in the zone. That all was hard. So just tell Krausey we're ready, man.
For people that don't know, Brendan,
do it over some soda pops in a recording.
Gotta have a prize.
Absolutely. Over the holidays, and by the way, for our listeners, Brendan Williams is an integral part of the Labor and Energy Show, produces it every week. We wouldn't have a show without him. And certainly, I get educated on these issues, and I really appreciate it because without being educated myself and being able to translate some of these complicated issues to the public, I would be, just like I was before we started the broadcast. So, guys, have a great holiday season. And hopefully the CARS Act is passed today. We'll have more from the Labor and Energy Show in just a minute.
Welcome to Pond Lehocky, the largest workers' compensation law firm in Pennsylvania. With over 250 years of combined courtroom experience, we've helped over 100,000 injured and disabled workers obtain benefits, as well as some of the biggest settlements in the state. Even better, Pond Lehocky doesn't charge a dime until you win. If you've been injured at work, give Pond Lehocky a call.
The best way to describe Anthony, David, and Jan are that they're my brothers. I met Anthony at LA Fitness because I noticed that he had a Teamster's bag and his dad was a Teamster leader.
I'm a third-generation son of labor. My grandmother worked in a factory. My mother and father were both Teamster members. I don't think there's a trade that I don't have a family member in.
What's so big for me coming from a union background is what affects one member affects the entire membership.
A lot of people can relate to the issues that individuals deal with. We pride ourselves on empathy.
The big value that's always instilled in you if you grow up in a union household is the importance of brotherhood. People that lean on each other, that rely on each other.
When we were building this business, having that background and knowing what matters most to the union members is really what we use to drive and build out Retiree First.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News.
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
And back here on the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. Fascinating conversation. Very, very educational, JDoc. Still confusing, but a lot to know and a lot to learn about. And something we need to watch. We need to continue to update, as you mentioned, the vote. We need to continue to keep our listening and our viewing audience updated.
Well, absolutely, Joe. And again, thanks to Brendan Williams, Head of Government Relations, PBF Energy, and Aaron Ringel, the Vice President, Government Relations for the AFPM. And like I said at the end of the last show, by the time this show airs, hopefully the CARS Act, and that's HR 4468, will have passed in the House, okay? And I'm going to repeat it again to our listeners. You see how your member of Congress voted. Thank them if they supported it, and of course, if they didn't support it, you should be expressing strong concern and disappointment. Okay, it's so important to make sure that our voices are heard, Joe. Americans deserve the opportunity to choose the type of car they drive, but also to be involved in, the decisions to drive the cars that we want to drive, and obviously to maintain our environmental standards at the same time.
Hey, we're all environmentalists when it comes down to it here on the Labor and Energy Show. That's going to do it for this edition of the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. Don't forget you can download the podcast of this episode and all of our episodes of the Labor and Energy Show that air across the Jacob Media Network. Go to Apple or Spotify and just search the Labor and Energy Show. On behalf of my partner, JDoc, I'm Joe Krause. See you next time, everybody. Okay, JDoc.
Pretty good, huh?
Welcome to Pond Lehocky, the largest workers' compensation law firm in Pennsylvania. With over 250 years of combined courtroom experience, we've helped over 100,000 injured and disabled workers obtain benefits, as well as some of the biggest settlements in the state. Even better, Pond Lehocky doesn't charge a dime until you win. If you've been injured at work, give Pond Lehocky a call.